He kicked the widow hard enough to drop her in the dust. Laughter, spurs, blood on her lip. Who would stop the richest man in town? What could a quiet Apache widow do against his money, his men, his law? She stood, wiped the blood. "You took your fun," she said. "Now I take everything." And the street went silent. Midday heat hammered the street until even the flies moved slow. The rich cowboy, Colton Hale, stood tall on the boardwalk, hat tilted, silver studs winking on his belt. He had the kind of smile men wore when nothing had ever said no to them. At his boots, the widow knelt. Cornmeal spilled from a torn sack, powdering her skirt. A bruise bloomed on her cheekbone. She gathered each handful as if counting time. Colton thumbed his vest button. "That's what you get for walking where men work." No one laughed now. They had already laughed when he kicked her. The echo of it hung like smoke. The pianist inside the saloon kept his hands off the keys. The sheriff on the porch looked down and found something important to study in his nails. The widow rose. She was slim, not tall, a braid loose against her back. Her eyes were not loud, but they did not bend. "You put your boot on a wife," she said, "even if her husband sleeps under stone." Colton's grin deepened. "He sleeps under cheap stone. Your husband should have picked a richer widow." Someone choked on a breath. The widow did not. She tied the cornmeal sack with steady fingers, then met the sheriff's eyes. "Law," she said, "you saw." The sheriff shifted. "Didn't see enough to write." Colton's men enjoyed that. Boots scraped, spurs sang, coins clicked between fingers. And in those small sounds, the street remembered who paid wages, who owned the well, who bought the judge a new stovepipe hat last winter. The widow tasted blood, then let it go. She looked at Colton's polished spur, at the dust stuck to its rowel, at the tidy seam of pride in the man who wore it. "What's your name?" she asked. Colton blinked, amused. "You don't know?" "I know the sound of it," she said. "I want to hear you say it." He tipped the brim. "Colton Hale." She repeated it once, softly, as if testing how it felt against her tongue. "Colton Hale. Good. I like to carve straight." A ranch hand snorted. "Carve what?" She made a small knot in the rag that tied her sack. One, then another, two. Her thumb pressed each tight. "Days," she said. "Day 1, I touch your horse. Day 2, I touch your water. Day 3, I touch your sleep. Day 4, I touch your name." Colton chuckled, though not as easily as before. "You don't touch anything I own, widow." "Everything you own touches something else," she said. "That's how men like you make a fortune, by letting other people carry it." He stepped close. The shade of him fell across her face. "You're in my town. You breathe my dust." She looked at the dust. "Then watch what it does for me." A stable boy ran past, breathless, eyes wide. "Mr. Hale, your stallion." He swallowed the end. "What about him?" The boy couldn't finish. He pointed instead down the alley behind the saloon. A rustle rose, an ugly, frantic sound of hooves fighting rope. Colton's smile vanished. He pushed past the widow, past the sheriff, past the men who lived inside his shadow. They followed, a knot of money and fear, around the corner where the alley narrowed and the light died. The widow did not run. She walked. She was there when Colton reached his stallion, Spanish blood, black as a storm, foam at the mouth, eyes white. The halter had been cut and retied, a clumsy tangle designed to look like panic tied it. But it wasn't panic. It was a hand that knew horses and wanted them angry at the right moment. "Who touched him?" Colton barked. No answer. Only the stallion's scream and the slap of his hooves against a rail that would not hold. The widow stood by the rain barrel. The water on its rim held a skin of dust. She set the cornmeal sack on the lid and touched the barrel's iron band with 2 fingers, as if greeting an old friend. "Day 1, she said, not loud. "I touch your horse." "You did this," Colton snapped. She lifted a brow. "You kicked me for fun. I tied a knot for balance. You cut my halter." She looked at the leather, one thin slice, clean and flat, then another, hidden in the knot. The horse had done the rest. "I adjusted your choices," she said. The sheriff found his tongue. "Ma'am, if you admit to—" "I admitted to nothing," she said. "Men like him confess every day when they walk." Hoots from Colton's hands died quick. The rail cracked. The stallion lunged and snapped the last strand. He bolted for open street, shoulder slamming a barrel. Water sloshed hard, spilled, ran in a sheet across the sun-baked dirt, turned it slick. The stallion hit that slick patch at full speed. He pitched. The street gasped. Hooves scissored. Then the horse found footing and, with a rage that belonged to all animals that have suffered shame, shot past the general store and into the wide. Colton swore, running after. Two of his men scrambled for saddles. The stable boy looked like he wanted to fold into himself and vanish. The widow stayed by the barrel. She dipped a tin cup, tasted. "Warm," she said. "Day 2 is easier," the sheriff huffed. "You're making threats, and I can't—" "You can't," she agreed. "You never can when the boots shine like his." He flushed. "You're not from here. You don't know how things are." She turned then, a tiny motion, enough for him to see the long, thin scar beneath her ear, old and silver, the kind a rope leaves when a man ties anger into it. "I know exactly how things are," she said. A woman from the boarding house hurried up, apron still dusted with flour. She pressed a folded cloth into the widow's palm. "For your cheek," she whispered. The widow accepted it, pressed it once, then folded it back into the woman's hand. "Thank you. Keep it. You may need to bind something you care about before the day ends." "Is he truly your target?" the woman asked, voice low. "He is the rope," the widow said. "He pulls other men." "I will cut the rope." Colton's gallop faded. In its place rose the chatter of town, doors closing, a judge's laugh behind the bank, the click of a telegraph key tapping out the news that Colton Hale had been seen running after a horse he could not hold. The widow walked to the well. Iron creaked under her palm. She studied the crank, the bucket, the lock Colton had installed last summer when the dry spell turned men mean. He sold water after dark then, at double price. The sheriff had counted the coins with him. She brushed the dust from the lock. "Day 2, she repeated. The sheriff's eyes sharpened. "Don't now." "I won't," she said. "Not today." "Then what are you doing?" She made the third knot in the rag around her sack. 3. She tied it hard. "Listening," she said, "to where your fear lives." He swallowed. His gaze flicked to the bank. "You don't scare me." "I don't need to," she said. "He does." The judge stepped onto the boardwalk, glanced at the empty street, smiled without moving his mouth. "Trouble?" "Only a widow with ideas," the sheriff said. The judge looked at her, at the knot in her rag, at the bruise on her cheek. "Ideas cost money you don't have." The widow nodded, polite. "So I'll borrow from him." She jerked her chin toward the alley where Colton had disappeared. "He lends badly." The judge sniffed. "You'll be gone by sundown." "By sundown," she said. "He'll be the one praying for quiet." "How?" the judge asked, curious despite himself. She smiled once, the kind a knife makes when it thinks about entering wood. "By using the only law that never looks away." "What law is that?" "Consequence." Boots pounded. Colton reappeared at the far end of the street, red-faced, hat askew, the stallion a shrinking dot on the horizon. His men trailed him, curses drifting behind like cheap perfume. He saw the widow and stopped dead. He pointed. "You. Out of my town by dusk." She met his finger with her eyes, not moving. "Dusk is far. You'll crawl." "No," she said. "You will." He laughed, big and mean, the way men laugh when they want the world to hear and obey. "You think you can move me?" She touched her braid, once. "I can move what holds you up." "And what's that?" "Thirst," she said. "And sleep." Something in his face flickered, brief, then gone. She stepped back from the well and set the cornmeal on the porch rail of the boarding house woman who had offered the cloth. "If you need bread," she told her, "make it today." "Why?" "Because tomorrow," the widow said, and her voice went so soft the street had to lean in to catch it. "The ovens may be busy with something else." "What?" "Paper," she said. "Men like him burn paper when they're afraid." The judge's hand twitched toward his breast pocket. The telegraph ticked faster. The sheriff licked his lips. Colton put his hands on his hips, trying to fill the sky. "You're one woman with a bag of cornmeal," She made the fourth knot, tight. 4, she counted. The name comes last. What name? He sneered. Hale. No, she said. Your other one. His mouth opened, then closed. What other one? The sheriff asked, too quick. The widow lifted the rag and showed the knots to the sun, as if making a contract where everyone could see it. Day 1, horse. Day 2, water. Day 3, sleep. Day 4... She let the last word fall like a small stone into a deep well. Bastard, she said. Colour drained from Colton's face. A crack ran through his grin. He moved without thinking, a step forward that looked like a man catching himself before a cliff. How do you... he began. The telegraph stopped. Even the flies seemed to hush. The widow turned, taking her cornmeal, walking away as if the world was simple. Sun is high, she said. It will be a long afternoon. Stop, Colton snapped. Or you what? She asked without turning. Kick me again. Boot leather creaked behind her, the quick jerk of a hand going for a gun that wasn't there. She did not hurry. She did not look back. Colton's men watched him. The sheriff watched them. The judge pressed a paper flat with his palm, as if it might try to fly away. Down the street a church bell tolled noon. Once, twice. The sound rolled through dust and fear and heat. On the third toll, a window shattered in Colton's house on the hill. He flinched. Everyone turned. The bell tolled again, and the screaming started. The scream rolled down the hill like thunder splitting rock. Windows rattled, chickens scattered, wings flapping. The town turned as one toward the Hale mansion, 2 stories of whitewashed wood and pride perched above them all. Colton stiffened. Stay here, he barked, though his voice cracked. No one moved. The widow stopped at the corner, the cornmeal sack heavy on her hip. Her braid swung when she looked back, not at Colton, at the house. Her eyes were calm, too calm, as if she had expected the sound. What is that? The judge demanded, voice sharp. Colton spat, boots grinding dust. Thieves or drunks. Another crash, glass again, louder, then a long, low moan that wasn't glass. The boy who had fetched the news about the horse whispered, "It's inside." Colton's face drained. He shoved past his men, sprinting for the hill. His spurs bit the air. His men scrambled after him, tripping over each other to look brave. The widow stayed. The sheriff licked dry lips. "What did you do?" She shifted her sack, tied against her ribs with 4 knots. Day 3 begins. You... The sheriff stepped close enough to smell the dust in her hair. You touched his house? No, she said. I touched what sleeps in it. What's that supposed to mean? Her gaze held his, flat and sharp. Ask his wife. The sheriff blinked. His wife's dead. The widow tilted her head. So is mine. The crowd murmured. The boarding-house woman pulled her apron tight, whispering fast to herself, maybe a prayer, maybe a curse. From the hill came another scream, higher, shorter, like a man trying not to beg. The sheriff's hands twitched. If you've got tricks, they'll hang you. She leaned in so he alone could hear. No rope holds a woman twice. His throat closed. He stepped back. Dust swirled as riders came tearing down the slope. Colton's men, faces pale, eyes wide. One yelled, "It ain't right, something's in there." Colton was last, had gone, shirt torn, eyes bloodshot. He didn't look at the crowd. He looked only at the widow. "What did you put in my house?" he roared. The widow adjusted the knot on her sack. Nothing that wasn't already there. "You lie." She touched the scar under her ear. "You hear lies in your own sleep. I only opened the door." Behind him, smoke curled from an upper window. Faint, thin like a candle too close to drapes. The judge clutched his papers tighter. "If that place burns, it won't," she said. "Not yet. Not yet. Day 4 is the fire." Colton lunged, but his men caught his arms. Not to save her, but to save him. From what? None could name. The crowd whispered, then hushed when the widow walked to the church steps and set her sack down. She untied the rag, letting cornmeal spill like sand, grain by grain, making a line that the wind lifted and carried. "What are you doing?" the boarding-house woman asked. "Marking time," she said. "Every grain is a night he won't sleep." "You're cursing him." The widow's hand stilled. No, I'm reminding him. He already cursed himself. Colton tore free, veins bulging. You'll pay for this, you hear? You'll beg me? She lifted her eyes to the hill where his house loomed, cracked and shivering in the heat. I won't beg, and you won't sleep. By the 4th day, you'll wish for ropes. Silence thickened. Even the bell seemed to hold its tongue. Then another sound, faint but clear. A child's laughter, drifting down from the Hale house, light and cruel, as if mocking the man who owned it. Colton froze. His men crossed themselves. The widow gathered her sack, retied the rag, one knot looser now. 3, she said. Tomorrow, the last. She walked away, leaving Colton to his echo. The sheriff swallowed hard, sweat darkening his collar. What happens on the last day? The widow didn't turn. Her voice carried anyway, smooth as a knife sliding free. Names burned slower than wood. The next morning, dust hung thick as if the town itself held its breath. Men shuffled slower, women whispered tighter. Even the saloon kept its piano quiet. Everyone waited for what the widow might touch next. Colton Hale had not slept. The shadows under his eyes proved it, though he painted them over with anger. He strode into town, shirt stiff with sweat, gold watch chain flashing like a weapon. Where is she? He barked. No answer. Find her. His men scattered, eager but unwilling to look behind certain doors. The widow appeared on her own. Not from the hills, not from the shadows. She walked straight down the main street, her braid glinting in the sun, her sack on her shoulder, as if she carried nothing heavier than time itself. Colton stepped into her path. You think you can play games with me? You don't know who I am. She studied his watch chain. I know who you say you are. He clenched his jaw. I own this town. You rent it, she said, from fear. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The judge coughed into his fist, eyes darting. The sheriff shifted in place, torn between silence and duty. Colton raised his voice. Sheriff, arrest her. The sheriff rubbed his badge. On what charge? On every charge, Colton shouted. Threats, witchcraft, theft. The widow's gaze cut to the sheriff. Write them all. See whose hand shakes more. His hand already did. He dropped his eyes. Colton turned, snarling. You'll regret this. Shall ruin you. You already ruined yourself, she said. Something in her calm shook him worse than rage could. He jabbed a finger at her sack. What's in there? Memory, she said. He barked a laugh, sharp as glass. Empty words. Her lips barely moved. Not empty enough. She shifted the sack and a slip of parchment fluttered free. The wind carried it to Colton's boots. He picked it up, frowning. It was a note, not hers, his own signature at the bottom, promising repayment to a ranch hand he had never intended to pay. The man in the crowd recognized it first. That's mine. His voice cracked with years of swallowed bitterness. Colton's face burned red. It's a forgery. The widow spoke softly. Paper burns, but before it does, it speaks. She lifted another scrap from her sack, and another, notes, debts, IOUs, promises broken. Each one slipped from her hand like ash. The judge blanched. Where did you— Your clerk likes to talk when whiskey flows, she said. The crowd stirred, eyes widening, old wounds reopening as they recognized names, sums, lies. Colton's bravado faltered. You stole those. They were never yours, she replied. He lunged, but 2 townsmen stepped forward, blocking him, not for her, but for themselves, for what they saw in her hands. The widow dropped another slip. It bore the judge's scrawl. His hand trembled, papers clutched to his chest. This is slander, he said, voice thin. No, she said, it is truth in ink. Whispers surged like a tide. Men muttered about cheated wages, water sold at double, promises never kept. Wives murmured about flour gone missing. Children left hungry. Colton's throat worked. I'll bury you. She tied another knot in her rag. 4 knots now, tight and final. She held it high. Day 4, she said. The name. His voice cracked. What name? Her eyes found his. Bastard! The word struck like thunder. The crowd hushed. Colton's face went ashen, rage and fear twisting together. That's a lie. The widow's stare didn't blink. Ask your father's grave. A murmur rolled, ugly, dangerous, spreading fast. Men looked at each other with dawning recognition, with the cruel delight of gossip sharpened by truth. Colton's jaw trembled. He wanted to deny it, but the silence after his pause was worse than any confession. He shoved through the crowd, trying to escape their eyes, but eyes followed, always. The widow bent, gathered one slip of paper, and let the rest scatter. They tumbled down the street like dry leaves, clinging to boots and skirts, doors, each one a seed of shame. Colton turned once, his face twisted, his voice raw. You'll pay for this. She lifted her gaze. I already did. The church bell tolled again, and from the Hale mansion on the hill smoke rose, thicker, darker, the kind that spoke of fire eating wood. The first tongues of flame licked the Hale mansion's whitewashed walls. Thin, curling fingers of smoke coiled into the sky, dark against the morning light. The town gathered at the base of the hill, half in awe, half in fear. Colton staggered forward, hatless, his fine vest scorched from where he had tried and failed to fight the blaze inside. His eyes darted wild, red rims from smoke and sleeplessness. "Water!" he bellowed. "Buckets!" No one moved. The blacksmith's hammer stilled. The saloon's doors swung quiet. The judge turned his face away, lips tight, unwilling to order what no man dared to carry out. Only the boy with the horse stepped forward, hesitant. But his father caught his arm and shook his head. It's his fire, let it burn. Colton's voice broke. You'll let my house fall? The widow's voice cut from the back, calm, even. It isn't the house that falls, it's the lies. All eyes turned. She stood by the trough, braid loose now, the sack heavy against her hip. She did not raise her voice. She did not need to. You started this, Colton screamed at her. She tilted her head. No, you did. With every debt, every blow, every mouth you left hungry, houses are not built of wood alone. They're built of what men owe. The crowd rippled. The banker shifted, uneasy. The preacher's wife pulled her shawl tighter. Colton's rage boiled over. He shoved past them, scrambling toward her. You witch, you viper, I'll kill you myself. The sheriff stepped between them, hand on his revolver. That's enough, Colton. She ruined me. No, the sheriff said, though his hand shook on the grip. You did that yourself. A crack split the air, the sound of timber giving way. The crowd gasped as the mansion's roof caved, sparks exploding into the morning like angry stars. Colton's knees buckled. His empire crumbled before their eyes, not with gunfire, but with smoke and silence. The widow watched, her expression unreadable. She untied one knot from her sack, letting the rag dangle loose. 3 knots remained. What does it mean? The boarding-house woman whispered. It means, the widow said, there is still more to fall. Colton's chest heaved. Sweat ran with soot down his temples. He turned to the crowd, desperate. You'll help me rebuild. I pay you. I own you. The blacksmith spat in the dirt. Not any more. A murmur of agreement spread. Heads shook. Feet shuffled back. For the first time, no one moved when Colton gave an order. The widow stepped closer, her shadow long across the dust. Day 4 ends with ash. Day 5 begins with truth. Colton's voice cracked, small against the roar of his house collapsing. What truth? Her eyes pinned him. The truth of what you did to my husband. Gasps. The crowd leaned in. Even the sheriff froze. Colton blustered. I never touched. You buried him in the canyon, she said. You thought no one saw, but the earth keeps memory. A cold hush fell. The crowd glanced at one another, fear and curiosity tangling in their eyes. The widow's hand hovered over her sack. Tomorrow, the ground speaks, and when it does, even fire will sound merciful. Colton stumbled back, breath ragged. The last scraps of his pride clung to him like ash, but his eyes, wild, hunted, showed that he knew she was not finished. The fire roared higher, the mansion shrinking into its own grave. And above the crackle of flames, another sound came faint and chilling, a single coyote's howl, rolling across the ridge, long and lonely. The widow lifted her face toward it, lips moving in words only she could hear. The crowd shivered. Colton turned, staring into the smoke, as if expecting the dead themselves to step out of it. The fire had died down by dusk, leaving only black ribs of timber jutting from the hill like the bones of a carcass. The town smelled of smoke, bitter and clinging. Colton Hale stood apart, his face half hidden in soot, his hands trembling though he tried to clench them into fists. The widow stepped into the street. The sack was lighter now, swinging against her side with each stride. The people parted without a word, as though the dust itself carried her forward. She stopped in front of the sheriff. "You still wear that badge," she said. "Will you hear a charge?" The sheriff wet his lips. "Depends on the charge." "Murder!" Gasps ripped through the crowd. Colton snarled, eyes bulging. "This is madness!" The widow's voice was steady, sharp as a knife on stone. "3 winters past, my husband rode with a wagon full of corn. He never came home. I found the wagon splintered, the corn gone, the earth stained. Nobody." The preacher's wife clutched her shawl tighter. "Coyotes," she whispered. The widow shook her head. "No coyote takes a man's boots. No coyote sells his horse at auction." The crowd stirred. The blacksmith stepped forward. "I remember that horse, white blaze on its forehead. Colton rode it the next spring." Colton's face turned red. "Lies. I bought that horse fair." The widow untied her sack. From within she drew a scrap of leather, worn, cracked, but still bearing a distinct carving of an Apache symbol. She held it up. "This was my husband's bridle. I took it back from Colton's barn." The murmurs grew louder, sharper. The judge tried to wave it away. Trinkets, stories, nothing proven. The widow's eyes locked on him. Then hear the ground speak. The sheriff frowned. "What do you mean?" She raised her hand, pointing beyond the ridge where the canyon cut deep into the land. "I buried what I found there. Bones too broken for coyotes, skull caved by iron, ribs pierced by blade. I covered them because no priest would. I kept them because no court would." Colton's breath rattled. "She's lying." The widow's voice dropped lower, her words cutting closer. "You left a ring on his finger. Gold, dented where your boot crushed it. Shall I show them?" Colton's legs buckled. His men looked at each other, uncertain, their loyalty slipping like sand through fists. The sheriff's hand tightened on his revolver, not to draw it, but to remind himself it was there. If that's true— He looked at Colton, then back at her. "Then this town stands on blood." The widow nodded once. "It does." "And tonight it knows whose," the boarding-house woman whispered. "She's cursed him." "No," said the blacksmith, eyes burning. "She's naming him." Colton's roar cracked the air. "Enough!" He stumbled forward, face twisted, spittle flying. "You think you can destroy me with scraps and stories? I am Hale. I own the cattle, the water, the land. You are nothing." The widow's gaze didn't flinch. "Nothing still carries a name. And that name is wife." The word cut deep, cutting through the crowd. She wasn't only a widow now, she was the voice of every debt, every bruise, every grave left unmarked. Colton drew his revolver, hands shaking. He leveled it at her chest. The sheriff shouted, "Don't!" But before he could fire, a sound split the night, the cry of a boy. All turned. From the edge of the crowd, a thin figure stepped forward. Barefoot, ragged shirt clinging to his shoulders. His face gaunt, but his eyes sharp, fixed on Colton like knives. "That's my father you put in the ground." The boy's voice was small, but it struck like thunder. The widow's eyes flicked to him, her breath catching, but she said nothing. The crowd shifted, unease turning to something harder, sharper. Colton's revolver wavered. "Who are you?" The boy stepped closer, voice steady now. "The son you thought would never speak." Colton froze. The widow's hand went to the scar under her ear, her eyes wet but fierce. The boy lifted a small pouch from his belt. He opened it, spilling a handful of dirt into his palm. "I dug where you buried him, I know." The hush deepened, thick enough to strangle. Colton staggered back for the first time. His voice cracked not with rage but with fear. The boy's words hung heavy in the cooling night. Dust swirled at his ankles, carried by the wind as if the desert itself paused to listen. Colton's revolver trembled, his mouth opened, then closed, a fish gasping in dry air. For once, there was no command, no insult sharp enough to cover the truth spilling out before him. The boy's eyes glinted, catching the firelight from the dying embers of Colton's mansion. "I found his bones," he said, voice unshaken. "Buried shallow, like you were too hurried to dig deep. I found his ring. I found the dent from your boot." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The sheriff's grip on his holster twitched. The judge looked away, his face blanching like paper in the moonlight. "You lie," Colton rasped. His gun still pointed, but his arm sagged lower. "You're just a ragged orphan." The widow stepped closer to the boy, her braid brushing her shoulder as she bowed her head for the first time. Her hand touched his shoulder, gentle, grounding him. "Not orphan," she said softly. "Son." The crowd stirred louder now, the murmurs rolling into a wave. Men who had kept their heads down for years raised their voices in low growls. Women whispered names of debts unpaid, land stolen, cattle driven off under false contracts. Colton's face turned wild. "You think you can trust a squaw's brat? You think he knows what law is?" The blacksmith's hammer clanged as he slammed it into the dirt at his feet. "He knows what truth is. And it's more than we ever got from you." Colton turned desperate, scanning faces that once bent under his power, but they did not bend now. Eyes narrowed, mouths tightened. Every lie he had spoken seemed to hang visible above him, painted in the smoke. The boy's hand lifted the pouch again. He let the dirt slip between his fingers. "This is my father's dust. The ground remembers him, even if you hoped it wouldn't." The sheriff swallowed hard, his voice thick. "Colton, if what they say is true—" "It isn't," Colton snapped. "It's slander, conspiracy." The widow's tone cut him like ice. "Then swear before the bones. Swear it with a hand on the earth you stained." The crowd buzzed louder. Someone shouted, "Make him swear." Another echoed, "Let the ground judge." Colton's hand shook so badly, the revolver clattered from his grip. It fell into the dust, spinning once before lying still. He staggered, clutching at his vest, eyes darting like a trapped animal. The widow's voice dropped, soft as the coyote's cry. "Day 6 begins tomorrow. By then, the earth will have spoken." Colton's chest heaved. He spun toward the sheriff, grabbing at his badge. "Arrest her! Arrest them both!" The sheriff pulled away, face grim. "I can't arrest truth, Colton." "You'll regret this!" Colton's voice cracked, breaking into a half-sob, half-roar. "Every one of you! You think you're free of me. You'll starve without my cattle and without my water." The boy stepped forward, dirt still clinging to his hands. Better to starve free than feast as slaves. The crowd roared, not loud, but low and deadly, a sound of something long-caged rattling its chains. Colton backed away, stumbling, until his boots struck a fallen timber still smouldering from his mansion's ruin. Sparks leapt, lighting his trousers in fleeting orange. He slapped at them, frantic, as the widow and her son stood unmoving, their eyes locked on him. For the first time, Colton Hale looked small, not in body, but in spirit. His empire of fear was ash, his voice hollow, his power snapped like a dry twig. The widow turned, her braid swinging, her words meant for the crowd as much as for him. "The earth keeps count, and so do we." She tied the rag on her sack again. 2 knots left. The crowd murmured, fear and awe mingling, as though they knew each knot was a step closer to the end of a story they had all lived under. Colton stumbled into the darkness, his men hesitating before following. But hesitation was enough. It meant doubt had seeded, and doubt was the first crack in his reign. The boy stood taller, dirt still staining his fingers, his jaw tight. "Tomorrow," he whispered, almost to himself. The widow heard, and her eyes gleamed with something between pride and sorrow. She touched his cheek, just for a breath, then let her hand fall. And from the canyon beyond the ridge, the coyotes howled again, long, mournful, and unbroken. The crowd shivered as if the earth itself had joined their side. Dawn broke cold, the kind that cut through even the thickest coats. The townsfolk moved slow, their eyes heavy from sleeplessness, drawn toward the canyon like moths toward a fire. Word had spread before sunrise. The widow was walking the trail with her son, carrying the sack with its 2 knots still bound tight. They gathered on the ridge, boots crunching gravel, breath misting pale in the morning air. Below, the canyon yawned wide, its walls etched in shadows, the floor a scar of stone and dust. The widow stepped forward, her son at her side. She held the sack high. "Day 6, she said. The sheriff cleared his throat, voice rough. "What do you mean to show us?" "The earth remembers," she said, "and it does not lie." She knelt at the canyon's edge, fingers digging into the packed soil. Her son crouched with her, hands steady despite their youth. Together they scraped until stone gave way to softer earth. The crowd leaned in, whispers hissing through the chill. Then came the sound, wood clinking against metal. She pulled free a rusted spur, its rowel broken, dried earth still clinging to the strap. She held it up. "This fell when he was beaten. I kept it hidden," gasps. Someone muttered, "That's Colton's make." She dug deeper, slower this time, her son's small hands helping. More scraps emerged. A torn piece of blue fabric, stiff with age. The buckle of a belt, cracked but marked with the same initials hammered into Colton's branding iron. C.H. The widow rose, dirt streaking her palms. Her eyes scanned the crowd. "He left his sins here, thinking the ground would bury them. But the ground spits them back." Colton's voice thundered from behind them. "Enough!" He strode to the edge, his face pale, eyes bloodshot. His men trailed and uncertain, like wolves not sure of their alpha. "She planted those, all of it, you fools, can't you see?" The widow's son held up the belt buckle. "Then why does it bear your mark?" The crowd erupted in murmurs, louder this time, rolling toward shouts. "Prove it, Colton!" a ranch hand barked. "Swear before God!" cried the preacher's wife, Colton's jaw clenched. He looked at the sheriff, searching for support, but the lawman's eyes stayed hard. He turned to the judge, who avoided his gaze. For the first time, no man stepped forward to shield him. The widow loosened another knot on her sack. The rag dangled open, leaving only 1 knot tied. The crowd gasped. "What's left?" someone asked. She did not answer. She only looked at Colton, her silence sharper than any blade. The boy stepped closer, his thin frame trembling not from fear, but from the weight of truth. "You thought you buried my father. But the earth does not keep secrets for cowards." Colton's face twisted. He lunged at the boy, hand outstretched. The sheriff drew, steel flashing in the morning light. "Don't!" Colton froze, chest heaving, sweat streaking his soot-stained skin. The widow stepped between them, calm as stone. "Strike him, and the ground will swallow you whole." The crowd's noise swelled, a tide no man could command. Whispers of revolt turned into words of defiance. A ranch hand shouted, "We owe you nothing, Colton." Another followed. "Your reign ends here." Colton's men shifted uneasily, some lowering their guns, others stepping back entirely. The widow's eyes glimmered. "Day 6 is not the end. It is the warning." She tied the sack again, leaving 1 knot. Day 7 brings the reckoning. The canyon wind howled low, carrying dust across their boots, a voice older than any of them. The boy lifted his face to it, lips parting in words too soft for others to hear. Colton stumbled back from the edge, his bravado cracking, the crowd closing in not with fists but with their silence, their stares, their refusal to bow. He spat into the dirt. "You'll regret this, all of you. Day 7 will never come." But his voice faltered, the threat hollow, and the people knew it. Behind him, the charred skeleton of his mansion loomed against the horizon. Before him, the canyon stretched endless, swallowing every lie he ever told. And in between stood the widow and her son, dirt still on their hands, the sack still tied once more. The town waited. Day 7 was coming. Day 7 dawned harsh, the sky split by red streaks like open wounds. The whole town gathered before the burned husk of Colton's mansion. No cattle stirred, no hammer rang, no wagon rolled. The settlement itself had stopped to witness the end of something long festering. The widow stood in the center, her son close at her side. The sack hung from her fist, now down to its final knot. Silence pressed heavy, broken only by the caw of a crow circling above. "Day 7, she said. Her voice carried clean, slicing through the air. "The earth has spoken. Now comes the reckoning." Colton forced his way to the front, face gaunt, lips cracked. His once proud coat was torn, dirt-stained. He clutched a bottle at his side, the neck chipped, hand trembling. "You've poisoned this town with lies, but today it ends." The widow's gaze locked on him. "Yes, today it ends." With steady fingers, she pulled the final knot loose, the rag unfurled. From its depths, she drew a ring dulled by dust but unmistakable in its design. Gold, dented, carved with an Apache mark. The crowd surged forward, gasps breaking like thunder. "That's her husband's. I saw Colton wear it at cards. He mocked her with it, said it was payment." The widow raised it high. "This ring never left my husband's hand until it was taken from his corpse. Colton Hale wears his death as a trophy." The boy stepped forward, dirt still clinging beneath his nails. "I found it buried shallow, in the place where the bones lay. It is his, and it damns you." Colton's face blanched. He staggered back, the bottle slipping from his grasp and shattering at his feet. His voice cracked. It's a lie. I won it gambling. No," the sheriff cut in, voice firm. His hand rested on his revolver, though it did not rise. "I sat in on that game. You never had a ring, not until she lost her husband." The crowd roared, voices overlapping, anger, grief, years of silence breaking at once. The judge raised a shaking hand. "Colton Hale, you stand accused before your people." Colton's knees buckled. "You all needed me. My cattle, my water, my power. Without me, you're nothing." The widow's eyes hardened. "Without you, we are free." Her son stepped closer, holding the ring out for all to see. His voice, though young, rang with steel. "This is my father's last word, and it condemns the man who took him." The blacksmith shoved through the crowd, face red, veins bulging in his neck. "How many graves do you stand on, Colton? How many debts buried in the canyon?" Colton shook his head violently, spit flying. "I gave you work, land, coin." "You gave chains," the preacher's wife snapped, her frail voice louder than it had ever been. "And we let you bind us." The sheriff stepped forward. "It's over, Colton. The earth has spoken, and so have they." The widow let the ring drop into the dust at Colton's boots. The sound was sharp, final, like a gavel striking wood. Colton stared at it, eyes wide, chest heaving. For a long moment, he did nothing. Then his legs gave way, and he collapsed to his knees, hands clutching the dirt as though it might swallow him whole. The crowd pressed in, a wall of faces no longer bowed, no longer silent. His men melted away, slipping into alleys, abandoning him as the tide turned. The widow turned, taking her son's hand. "The earth keeps count," she whispered. The boy squeezed her fingers tight, "and today it collects." Behind them, Colton's sobs tore the air, high and broken, not the sound of a man, but of something hollowed, emptied, undone. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last of the night. The settlement stood different now, not in its buildings, not in its dust, but in its people. Their fear had cracked, their silence had broken, and at the center of it, a widow who had counted 7 days, each knot carrying her closer to this reckoning. The ring still lay in the dust, glinting weakly under the rising sun. No one bent to pick it up. It was not theirs to touch. It belonged to the dead, and to the earth that had given it back. Colton knelt there, his shoulders shaking, his face buried in his hands. His sobs scraped the silence raw, an ugly sound against the stillness. The once proud master of the valley had shrunk to nothing more than a man caught between guilt and fear. The sheriff stepped forward, boots crunching slow, deliberate. His voice carried for all to hear. "Colton Hale, you're finished." He didn't raise his gun. He didn't need to. The law wasn't in bullets anymore. It was in the people's eyes, all fixed on Colton like a jury that had already decided. The widow and her boy stood apart, but every gaze flicked between them and the fallen cowboy. She hadn't swung a fist or fired a shot, yet it was her hands that had brought him to his knees. The blacksmith spat into the dirt. What now? No one answered at first. The crowd shifted, murmurs swelling. They'd lived so long under Colton's shadow that even with him broken before them, they felt the weight of his absence like a hole in the sky. The preacher's wife spoke, her voice thin but steady. "We decide together. No more one man holding the town in chains." A ranch hand nodded. "A council. Farmers, smiths, traders, all of us." Another shouted, "And her. She kept the count when none of us dared." The widow's gaze swept over them, unreadable. She touched her son's shoulder, grounding herself in his presence. "I did what the earth asked, nothing more." The boy's jaw tightened. "You showed them the truth." Colton stirred, lifting his head. His face was streaked with dirt and tears, his eyes wild. "You think you're free? You think you can survive without me? The cattle won't water themselves? The land won't feed you?" His voice broke, shrill, desperate. "You'll crawl back. You'll beg." But no one moved toward him. Men who once bowed their heads now looked away, disgusted. Women who once crossed the street at his approach now stared back, unflinching. The sheriff turned his back on Colton. That gesture alone carried more finality than chains. The widow bent, picked up the ring, and pressed it into her son's palm. "Keep it," she murmured, "not as a burden, as memory." The boy closed his fist tight around it, the gold biting into his skin. His eyes didn't leave Colton's broken frame. Around them, the town buzzed louder. Ideas, arguments, plans. Some wanted swift justice, others wanted exile, but all agreed on one truth. Colton Hale's rule was dead. The judge, pale and trembling, tried to speak. There must be trial." "No," the blacksmith cut him off. "His trial already happened. 7 days long. We all sat jury." Murmurs of agreement spread. The judge fell silent, his authority hollow. The widow lifted her face to the rising sun. "Justice isn't in gallows or papers. It's in the living who refuse to forget." Her son's voice carried next, thin but sharp. "Then we don't forget." The sheriff nodded. "Nor forgive, but we build." The people shifted again, their murmurs lighter now, less afraid. A current of possibility rippled through them. They had been ruled by fear for so long. The thought of ruling themselves felt like stepping onto new ground, uneven, but theirs. Colton's men, what few remained, drifted away like shadows dissolving at dawn. No one stopped them. Their power had vanished with the man who had commanded it. The widow turned back to Colton, her eyes sharp but not cruel. "The earth has judged. Now you live with its verdict." He sagged forward, forehead pressed to the dirt, his voice a hoarse whisper. It isn't over." But the words rang hollow. The boy's grip tightened on the ring. "Yes," he said, his voice low but certain. "It is." The town stood in silence, watching the last ember of Colton Hale burn out in the dust. But beneath the quiet, another question simmered. If Colton's power had died, who or what would rise to take its place? The desert wind curled through the ruins, carrying the question across the ridge. No one answered. Not yet. The embers of Colton's ruin still smoldered when the townsfolk gathered in the saloon. The place smelled of smoke and spilled whiskey, wood creaking under the weight of so many boots. Men stood shoulder to shoulder, women lined the walls, children peered through gaps in the crowd. The widow sat near the hearth, her son close, the ring still clutched tight in his hand. The sheriff stood tall at the center. "We need order," he said. "Not one man's rule. A council, a voice for every hand that works this land." Murmurs spread, half agreement, half doubt. The blacksmith crossed his arms. "And who keeps the peace when tempers flare? We can't all be sheriffs." The preacher's wife raised her voice. "Then we speak as one. Each family, one vote." Laughter cracked the air, sharp, bitter. A rancher in a wide hat spat into a spittoon. "One vote for a family with 10 head of cattle, same as for the widow and her boy with nothing but dirt. That's not justice, that's madness." Eyes turned to the widow. She lifted her chin, her voice calm but cutting. My husband's blood bought this soil. The earth doesn't weigh cattle. It weighs truth. The rancher sneered. Easy words when you've nothing to lose. Her son stood, small but unyielding. He raised the ring high. We lost everything, and still we stood. Can you say the same? The saloon quieted. Even the rancher's jaw worked, no words finding purchase. The judge, pale and shaking, spoke next. There must be structure. We cannot drift like sand. Elect leaders, yes, but bound by law. Whose law? The blacksmith demanded. The same papers Colton twisted. The air thickened. Voices clashed, sharp and rising. A woman shouted for fairness. A man barked about cattle. Another cursed the preacher's wife. Soon the saloon roared, every voice fighting to be heard, every fear clawing its way to the surface. The sheriff slammed his palm against the table. Quiet! His voice cracked like a gunshot. Silence fell, jagged but complete. You all want freedom, but freedom without order is just another kind of chain. The widow's gaze swept the room. Chains are built when men forget to listen. If this council is to stand, it must listen to the weak as much as the strong. Her words cooled the air, but doubt lingered. The rancher muttered, Words don't build fences. The blacksmith added, or keep raiders off our backs. The boy stepped forward again. His voice was young, but each word struck with the clarity of steel. Then build both, fences and council. Fight raiders and silence. Don't choose one. Choose all. For a moment, the room stilled. The preacher's wife smiled faintly, whispering, from the mouth of a child. But outside, a sudden crack echoed through the street. A gunshot, sharp and unmissable. The saloon doors banged open. A ranch hand stumbled in, face white. They're coming, he gasped. Riders on the ridge, armed, 50 strong. Gasps tore through the room. Fear returned swift and merciless. The sheriff's hand went to his revolver. Colton's kin, the widow rose, steady as stone. Day 7 may be done, but the earth hasn't finished speaking. The boy tightened his grip on the ring, his eyes hard. Then let it speak through us. The townsfolk froze between fear and resolve, their fragile unity hanging in the balance. Outside, the thunder of hooves drew closer, each beat shaking the earth like a drum of war. The saloon emptied like a flood, boots pounding the dirt. Dust hung in the air, thick as breath, as townsfolk spilled into the street. Above them, on the ridge where dawn's light struck the rocks, red, riders crested the horizon, 50 strong, their rifles glinting, banners of dust trailing behind. They're Colton's kin, the sheriff growled. Cousins, nephews, hired hands he paid in blood instead of coin. The blacksmith spat, vultures. Come to pick at his carcass. The widow stood still, her son at her side. The ring clutched tight. She raised her chin. They heard the earth take him. Now they come to take back what was never theirs. The riders descended, the thunder of hooves shaking the street boards loose. Children hid behind skirts. Women gripped pitchforks. Men raised their rifles. But the fear was raw, fresh. Many hands trembled. At the front of the riders, a man in a black duster reined his horse. His face was weathered, jaw like stone, eyes colder than steel. He surveyed the crowd with disdain. You think Colton's done? His blood still owns this land. The sheriff stepped forward, hand resting on his revolver. Colton's rule died with him. You've no claim here. The rider's lip curled. Then we'll carve our claim in flesh. He lifted his hand. Rifles cocked in unison, the sound like a lock sealing shut. Gasps rippled through the townsfolk. Some shifted back, fear pulling them toward retreat. The fragile unity born in the saloon threatened to shatter. The widow's voice cut through the air. The earth has already judged. Do you think it will forget Colton's kin? The man on horseback sneered. The earth doesn't scare us. Guns do. Before he could signal, the widow's son stepped forward, ring raised high. His small figure stood unflinching before the wall of riders. His voice cracked but rang clear. This ring was my father's. Colton stole it when he killed him. The earth spat it back, and it damned him. Now it damns you too. The riders murmured, uneasy. Some glanced at one another, doubt flickering in their eyes. The Black Duster leader snarled, "Silence the boy." The sheriff drew, "He speaks truth." And the truth already toppled one hail. The widow's gaze swept the riders. "The earth keeps count. It counted Colton. It will count you." The preacher's wife raised her frail arms, trembling but defiant. 7 days, we saw it. The land itself rose against him. Voices joined, dozens, then hundreds. "The earth keeps count. The earth keeps count." The chant rolled through the street, a wave that met the riders head-on, horses stamped, nervous, eyes wide. The wall of sound shook the air. No bullets fired yet, but the spirit of a people risen. The Black Duster's face hardened. He yanked his rifle free. "Enough!" But before he could fire, the sheriff's revolver cracked first. The bullet struck the ground inches from the rider's horse. The beast reared, neighing loud, nearly throwing him. The sheriff's voice thundered, "You want war. You'll ride over every last man, woman, and child here. And the earth will bury you beside Colton." Silence gripped the ridge. The riders shifted uneasily, some lowering their guns, others pulling back their reins. The boy lifted the ring higher. "Go back, or stay, and the earth will take you too." For a long moment, the standoff held, the ridge above, the town below, the sun burning white between them. Then one rider turned his horse, another followed, then 3 more. The Black Duster cursed, rage twisting his face, but he felt his men slip away, their loyalty crumbling under fear and doubt. At last, he spat into the dust and wheeled his horse. "This isn't finished." He kicked hard, galloping back over the ridge, his men scattering after him. The thunder of hooves faded, leaving only silence, broken by the crowd's collective breath. The widow closed her eyes, whispering, "Day 7 is done." But her son shook his head. His grip on the ring was iron. "No, it only begins now. We build, or someone worse will come." The sheriff met the boy's gaze, then the widow's. "He's right. Colton's shadow is gone, but the desert still hungers." The people nodded, some with fear, others with resolve. For the first time, the future was theirs, but it would not come easy. The earth had spoken, but it had not promised peace. The sun was sinking, pouring its last fire across the valley. The town gathered again, not in Colton's saloon, not before his ruins, but in the open square where dust met sky. No one claimed the center, not yet. The silence felt like a held breath. The sheriff stood forward, his coat hung heavy, his voice low but carrying. "We drove them off today, not with bullets, but with truth. But truth alone won't guard our homes when the next threat comes. We need something stronger, something lasting." The blacksmith nodded. "A council. Real voices, shared power." The preacher's wife leaned on her cane. "Voices are wind unless tied to oath." The judge, pale but steadier now, cleared his throat. "Then let us bind ourselves to oath, by word and by witness, no more rule by fear, no more silence by coin." The crowd shifted. Faces turned, waiting for agreement, for someone to lead, and always, eyes drifted to the widow and her boy. She felt it, the weight. She had carried her grief like stone, had counted her knots, had spoken when no one else dared. But this was different. This was not vengeance. It was burden. Her son squeezed her hand, the ring pressed between their palms. "They're waiting." Her breath caught. "I am not their leader. You gave them courage," he said simply. "Now give them a path." The sheriff's voice cut through. "Widow, you've stood where none of us would. If this council is to stand, it needs you." The blacksmith added, "And the boy, he's seen truth where we turned blind." Murmurs swelled, agreement, insistence, voices rising together. The widow raised her chin, eyes hard. "I counted 7 days because the earth demanded it. If I speak again, it will not be as ruler. It will be as one voice among many. No chains." "Not for me, not for you," the preacher's wife whispered. "Then speak it." So the widow stepped into the square. The boy stood beside her, small but unflinching. The ring glinted in his hand as he raised it high. "This ring," he said, his voice cracking but strong, "was proof of death. Let it now be proof of life. Proof that no man rules here alone again." He dropped it into the dust. The sound was sharp, final, yet different from when Colton's knees had met the ground. This time it was not burden, it was offering. The widow's voice followed, steady as stone. By this ring, by these hands, by this earth, we bind ourselves, not to one man but to each other. The sheriff laid his revolver beside the ring. The blacksmith set his hammer down. The preacher's wife lowered her cane. One by one, townsfolk stepped forward, leaving tokens in the dust. Tools, coins, scraps of cloth, symbols of their lives. A circle formed, built not of wood or stone, but of offerings, each bound to the next by silence and resolve. The judge raised his hand. By witness of all, let this be oath. A council of voices, a people bound to each other. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in a roar that was raw, real, alive. It was the sound of chains breaking, of silence shattering. Colton Hale's name vanished into dust. The earth had taken him. The people had risen. The widow bent, her hand brushing the ring once more. She looked at her son. His eyes burned with something fierce, something unyielding. "Keep it," she whispered. "Not as a weapon, as a reminder." He nodded, closing his fist around it. For the first time, the weight felt different, less burden, more promise. The sheriff stepped forward, meeting the widow's gaze. "The desert won't rest. Raiders, drought, hunger, they'll come again." Her voice held no fear. "Then we meet them, together." The boy spoke last, his words ringing clear. "The earth keeps count, so will we." And as the sun sank, the people stood taller, bound not by fear but by choice. A new order had begun, born not of conquest, but of reckoning. The widow's 7 days had ended. The town's first day had just begun. The desert changed slowly. Winds carried the dust, rain carved new channels, the sun baked the earth until it cracked. But in that settlement, change had come like a storm. Weeks after Colton's fall, the scars of fire and ruin still lingered. Blackened beams, broken fences, a house left hollow, yet life pushed forward. Children's laughter returned to the streets. Hammers rang on new frames. The smell of bread rose from ovens no longer shut by fear. The council met each dawn in the square, not in secret rooms or behind locked doors. The widow sat among them, her voice no louder than any other, but her presence a reminder. Her son, though young, listened more than he spoke, the ring still in his pocket. When he did speak, people leaned in. The sheriff kept his post, but no longer as one man against the tide. The blacksmith stood at his side when trouble stirred. The preacher's wife offered counsel. The judge steadied the law. None ruled. All carried. It was not easy. Arguments flared. Old rivalries resurfaced. But each time the people threatened to splinter. Someone would whisper the words that had bound them. The earth keeps count, and they would remember. One evening, the widow sat outside her tent with her son. The stars stretched endless above, the desert humming low around them. She held her husband's old blanket across her knees, mended and worn. The boy broke the silence. "Do you think Father would be proud?" Her throat tightened. She looked at him, the same eyes, the same stubborn jaw. "He would see his spirit in you. That's pride enough." The boy nodded, pulling the ring from his pocket. The gold was dulled, but the carving still sharp. He held it to the starlight. "I thought it was only a curse, but maybe it's a reminder that we must always choose better." She reached over, closing his hand around it. "It is both. Curses teach us, reminders guide us." From beyond, the faint sound of hooves echoed in the distance. A caravan moving west, maybe traders or settlers. The widow's gaze lingered on the horizon. "The world won't leave us alone, but we are no longer afraid." Her son leaned against her shoulder. "Because the earth keeps count." She smiled faintly, repeating the words that had carried her through 7 days of grief and fire. "Yes, and so will we." The stars burned brighter, as if listening. This was not just the story of one widow, or of a boy who raised his voice when all others stayed silent. It was the story of a people who remembered that silence is also a chain, and chains are broken only when the weak stand with the strong, when truth speaks louder than fear. In every age, in every place, there are Coltons, Men who believe power is theirs to keep no matter the cost. But there are also widows and children, and whole towns who rise when the earth itself demands reckoning. If this story moved you, if you felt the weight of silence break into courage, then remember, the earth keeps count, but so do we. Subscribe to this channel to hear more stories like this, stories of resilience, justice, and voices that refuse to be silenced. And if you want to carry this tale further, share it. Somewhere, someone may need to hear that even the smallest voice can turn the tide.